The morning sun rose over New Eden like it did every day. Golden light spread across the wheat fields and touched the rooftops of the small farming town. Children ran to school along dirt roads. Farmers checked their crops and talked about the weather. It was a peaceful place, the kind of place where people came to escape the noise of bigger worlds. New Eden sat on a green moon called Elysium 4. 12,000 people lived there. They had no soldiers. They had no warships. They had only a small security team that mostly dealt with wild animals that wandered too close to the farms. The colony existed because humanity believed in peace. They had signed treaties with their neighbors. They trusted that those treaties meant something. Sarah Conqua woke up late that morning. She was 23 years old and worked at the community center, teaching children how to paint. Her mother had already left for the medical clinic where she worked as a nurse. Her father was in the fields like always. Sarah made herself breakfast and looked out the window at the clear blue sky. She did not know that ships were coming. No one did. The Vrikari Dominion had planned this attack for months. They were a species that believed in purity. Their priests taught that the universe belonged to the chosen, and that lesser species were a corruption that needed to be cleaned away. Humanity spread too fast and too far for their liking. Humans built colonies everywhere. They traded with everyone. They smiled too much and talked too much and acted like they belonged among the stars. The Vrikari priests decided to send a message. They chose New Eden because it was weak, because it had no defenses, because destroying it would be easy and the message would be clear. They bypassed human military stations, using secret routes through empty space. They traveled in silence with their weapons ready. At noon, the sky above New Eden turned dark with ships. Sarah heard the screaming before she understood what was happening. She ran outside and saw people pointing at the sky. Dozens of Vrikari warships hung above the colony like black insects. They blocked out the sun. The colony administrator sent out an emergency broadcast immediately. His voice shook as he spoke into the communication system. He announced that New Eden was surrendering. He said they were a peaceful colony with no military. He begged for mercy. He pleaded for someone to respond. The Vrikari did not answer. The first bombs fell on the eastern fields. Fire erupted across the wheat and spread toward the town. People screamed and ran in every direction. Sarah stood frozen in her doorway, watching the world she knew begin to burn. Her father was in those eastern fields. She tried to run toward the fire, but her neighbor grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Old Mr. Chen, who had lived next door since before she was born, dragged her toward the community shelter. He was shouting something, but she could not hear him over the explosions. The shelter was already full of terrified people when they arrived. Children were crying. Adults were trying to contact family members on their devices. No signals were getting through. The Vrikari had blocked all communications. Above ground, the massacre continued. The Vrikari soldiers landed in the town center. They wore black armor and carried weapons that burned whatever they touched. They moved through the streets in organized groups, checking every building, dragging people out of their hiding places. The colony administrator walked toward them with his hands raised. He was still trying to surrender. He was still trying to explain that they were peaceful, that they had done nothing wrong, that there must be some mistake. A Vrikari soldier shot him in the chest. He fell in the middle of the street where everyone could see. After that, the killing became systematic. The soldiers went house to house. They pulled families from their homes and lined them up. They did not ask questions. They did not take prisoners. They simply killed everyone they found. Old and young, sick and healthy. It did not matter. Some people tried to fight back. A group of farmers armed with hunting tools attacked a squad of soldiers. They were burned alive in seconds. The Vrikari laughed as they died. Sarah could hear that laughter from inside the shelter. It was the worst sound she had ever heard. The shelter held for 2 hours before the soldiers found it. When the door blasted open, Sarah was in the back corner, hidden behind a storage cabinet with 3 children. She had her personal recording device in her hand. She did not know why she started recording. Maybe she thought someone should know what happened. Maybe she thought the truth should survive even if she did not. She watched through a gap as the soldiers dragged people out. She watched as they shot her neighbors one by one. She watched as Mr. Chen, the old man who had saved her life, stepped forward and spit in a soldier's face. They beat him to death with their weapons while he cursed them in 3 different languages. The soldiers were thorough, but they were not perfect. They did not check behind the storage cabinet. They did not find Sarah and the three children pressed against the wall, barely breathing, tears streaming silently down their faces. When the soldiers left, Sarah waited. She waited for hours. She waited until the screaming stopped and the fires grew quiet. Then she led the children out through a back passage and into the forest. They found others in the caves outside town. 43 survivors in total, hiding in the darkness while their world burned. They had no food. They had no medicine. They had only the recordings on Sarah's device and the memories of everything they had lost. For 3 days they hid. For 3 days, they listened to the Rakari ships patrol overhead. For 3 days, Sarah watched her recording over and over, making sure it was complete, making sure every moment of horror was captured. On the 4th day, a human cargo ship passed through the system. Sarah's emergency beacon reached it. Within hours, rescue shuttles descended through the smoke-filled sky. The rescue workers found bodies everywhere. 12,000 people had lived in New Eden. 43 survived. The Rakari had been thorough in their purification. Sarah was the last to board the rescue shuttle. She stood at the door and looked back at what remained of her home. The fields were black ash. The buildings were hollow shells. The school where she taught children to paint was a pile of rubble. She thought about her mother, who had gone to the medical clinic that morning and never came home. She thought about her father, who had died in the first bombing of the eastern fields. She thought about Mr. Chen, who had saved her life and lost his own. She thought about the laughter of the soldiers as they killed. Then she boarded the shuttle and left New Eden behind forever. The footage reached Earth 1 week later. The government released it to the public because they believed people had a right to know. They believed that truth was more important than comfort. Humanity watched. They watched the bombs fall on peaceful fields. They watched soldiers drag families from their homes. They watched executions carried out in broad daylight. They watched children running and screaming and dying. They watched the Rakari soldiers laugh. The reaction was unlike anything in human history. People gathered in silence outside government buildings. They did not shout or protest. They simply stood there, millions of them across every human world, staring at screens that played the footage on endless repeat. Parents held their children close. Veterans wept openly. Politicians who had spent their careers arguing about borders and budgets stood shoulder to shoulder without saying a word. Something changed in humanity that week. Something broke and something else took its place. The species that had always believed in diplomacy and trade, in peaceful solutions, looked at what had been done to their people and made a decision. The Rakari had wanted to send a message. They had wanted humanity to feel fear. They had wanted the lesser species to know its place. They got a message in return, but it was not the message they expected. Earth went silent. Human ambassadors withdrew from galactic functions without explanation. Trade negotiations were postponed indefinitely. Military exercises were canceled. Humanity turned inward and closed its doors. The galaxy watched with confusion. Some species expected anger and threats. Others expected desperate pleas for help. Instead, they got nothing. Just silence. The Rakari priests celebrated. They told their people that humanity had learned fear. They said the purification had worked. They began planning more attacks, confident that the lesser species would never fight back. They did not understand what the silence meant. They did not know that behind closed doors, humanity was preparing. Factories that made cargo ships were building something else. Soldiers who had lived peaceful lives were receiving new orders. A fleet larger than anything the galaxy had ever seen was gathering in the darkness between stars. The silence was not fear. The silence was focus. The silence was the deep breath before the storm, and the storm was coming. Admiral Marcus Chen had served in the United Earth Defense Force for 32 years. He had commanded ships in border disputes and peacekeeping missions. He had trained thousands of officers and written tactical manuals that were taught in military academies. In all that time, he had never fired a weapon in anger. He had hoped he never would. That hope died when he watched the footage from New Eden. He watched it once, alone in his quarters aboard the command station orbiting Mars. He watched the bombs fall. He watched the executions. He watched the soldiers laugh. He watched a young woman's recording capture every moment of horror in perfect clarity. When it ended, he sat in darkness for a long time. Then he received the orders he had spent his career dreading. The message came directly from Earth's unified government. It was simple and clear. Admiral Chen was to take command of the response fleet. He was to mobilize every available ship. He was to prepare for operations in Rakari space. There was no mention of negotiation, no talk of diplomatic solutions, just orders. Chen began his work immediately. The galaxy did not understand what was happening. They saw humanity withdraw from public life. They saw ambassadors leave their posts and return home. They saw trade ships complete their current contracts and then disappear from shipping lanes. They assumed humanity was afraid. The Rakari assumed it most of all. Their high priest addressed his people in a broadcast that reached across their empire. He stood in his golden robes before a crowd of thousands and declared victory. He said that the purification of New Eden had proven the weakness of the human species. He said that other colonies would follow. He said that the stars would be cleansed of human corruption until only the worthy remained. His followers cheered. They believed him. They had seen the footage too, but they saw something different. They saw the ease with which their soldiers had killed. They saw the helplessness of the victims. They saw proof that humanity was prey, not predator. They did not know what was gathering in the darkness. Admiral Chen worked without sleep for the first week. He reviewed fleet readiness reports from every sector. He coordinated with industrial centers that had already begun emergency production. He issued orders to reserve units that had not been activated in decades. The scale of the mobilization was unprecedented. Humanity had always maintained a modest military presence in the galaxy. Enough ships to defend their borders and protect their trade routes. Enough soldiers to handle local problems. They had never needed more because they preferred peace. They preferred to solve problems with words instead of weapons. But they had always planned for the possibility that words would not be enough. Hidden in asteroid fields and gas giant moons, reserve fleets waited in cold storage. Shipyards that publicly produced cargo vessels had secret sections that built warships. Training facilities maintained by skeleton crews could expand to full capacity in weeks. The infrastructure for total war existed. It had always existed. Humanity had simply hoped they would never need to use it. Now they used it. Within a month, the reserve fleets were activated. Within 2 months, the shipyards had produced more warships than humanity had deployed in the previous 50 years. Within 3 months, the largest military force in human history was ready to move. 400 capital ships, 2,000 support vessels, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, weapons that had been designed but never built, now rolling off production lines by the thousands. And at the center of it all stood Admiral Chen, carrying the weight of what was about to happen. He gathered his senior officers for a final briefing aboard the flagship. They stood around a holographic display showing Rakari space. Red dots marked military installations. Blue lines showed patrol routes. Yellow circles indicated civilian population centers. Chen spoke quietly. He always spoke quietly. It made people listen more carefully. He told them what they already knew, that the Rakari had murdered 12,000 innocent people, that they had done it deliberately, cruelly, and without provocation, that they had laughed while doing it. He told them what they were going to do about it. The fleet would enter Rakari space in complete communication silence. They would not announce their presence. They would not issue warnings. They would simply arrive and begin destroying every military target they could find. Civilian infrastructure would not be targeted. Population centers would be avoided. But every warship, every military base, every weapons factory, every piece of military hardware in the Rakari Dominion would be reduced to debris. One of his officers asked about prisoners. Chen was silent for a moment. Then he said that when New Eden tried to surrender, the Rakari had ignored them. When the colony administrator walked toward them with his hands raised, they had shot him. When civilians begged for their lives, the soldiers had laughed. There would be no prisoners, he said. Not at first. Not until the Rakari understood what they had awakened. The officers nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. Most did not. Before they departed, Chen gave one final order. Every ship in the fleet was to carry a copy of the New Eden footage. At every battle, before any weapons were fired, they would broadcast that footage to the enemy. They would show the Rakari what they had done. They would make sure everyone remembered why this was happening. The fleet launched from staging areas across human space. 400 warships arranged in perfect formation, moving as one toward the edge of Rakari territory. They traveled in silence. running dark, invisible to any sensors watching for them. Back on Earth, the people waited. They knew what was coming. The government had been honest with them. They had told the public that the fleet was moving and that there would be war. They had asked if this was what the people wanted. The answer had been unanimous. In the weeks of silence since New Eden, something had crystallized in the human spirit. The old debates about military spending and aggressive postures fell away. The philosophical arguments about pacifism and proportional response went quiet. What remained was simpler and older than civilization itself. Someone had killed their children. Someone had to pay. The Rakari remained oblivious. Their intelligence services had noticed the withdrawal of human ambassadors, but they interpreted it as fear. They had noticed changes in shipping patterns, but they assumed it was economic disruption. They did not imagine that the soft, smiling humans could respond with force. They did not understand what they had done. Humans were not native to easy worlds. They had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them constantly. Ice ages and heat waves, predators and parasites, earthquakes and storms. They had survived all of it. They had thrived despite all of it. They had developed a capacity for violence that most species could not imagine because most species had never needed it. That capacity had been sleeping for centuries. Humanity had decided to be peaceful. They had chosen diplomacy and trade because those tools worked better than war. They had built a civilization based on cooperation because cooperation produced better outcomes than conflict. But the capacity was still there, buried deep, waiting. New Eden woke it up. The fleet reached the edge of Rakari space on a quiet morning. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the tactical display. Before him lay the empire that had murdered 12,000 innocent people. Behind him stood the full military might of humanity. He gave the order. The fleet jumped into Rakari space in a single coordinated movement. 400 ships appeared out of nowhere, above the border outpost at Kaleth Station. The Rakari defenders had no warning. Their sensors barely registered the threat before it was on top of them. Chen opened a channel. His message was broadcast on every frequency. He did not identify himself. He did not issue demands. He simply transmitted the footage from New Eden. Every Rakari ship and station received the recording of what their people had done. They saw the bombs. They saw the executions. They heard the laughter. Then the human fleet opened fire. Kaleth Station lasted 90 seconds. The defending ships lasted less. When it was over, nothing remained but debris and escape pods drifting in the vacuum. Chen did not order the escape pods destroyed. He also did not order them rescued. He simply moved the fleet forward to the next target. The message had been sent. The war had begun, and humanity was just getting started. The Rakari Dominion had ruled its sector of space for 2,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species. They had built an empire based on the belief that they were chosen by the universe itself. Their military was vast and battle-tested. Their priests taught that no enemy could stand against the righteous. They had never faced anything like this. Admiral Chen's fleet moved through Rakari space like a blade through flesh. They struck without warning, destroyed without mercy, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Traditional naval tactics meant nothing against them. The Rakari tried to organize defensive lines. The humans simply went around them. They tried to protect key installations. The humans attacked everywhere at once. In the first week, 47 Rakari military bases were destroyed. In the second week, their primary shipyard at Varath Prime was reduced to molten slag. In the third week, their entire border fleet ceased to exist. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. Sarah Okonkwo watched from aboard a medical ship attached to the human fleet. She had not asked to be there. Admiral Chen had invited her personally. He believed that the survivors of New Eden had a right to witness justice. When she arrived on his flagship, he had looked at her with tired eyes and asked if she was certain she wanted to see this. She told him she needed to see it. Now she stood at a viewport and watched Rakari warships burn. She watched stations crumble under human fire. She watched the mighty empire that had killed her family begin to fall apart. She waited to feel satisfaction. She waited to feel triumph or vindication or anything like joy. Instead, she felt hollow. The burning ships did not bring her parents back. The destroyed stations did not return her neighbors to life. Nothing could undo what had been done. But still she watched. She owed them that much. The other species of the galaxy began sending messages to the Ricari. Some expressed concern, some offered mediation services, most simply wanted to understand what was happening. The Ricari High Priest ignored them all. He was too busy trying to save his crumbling empire. The Dominion called upon its allies. For centuries, they had maintained mutual defense treaties with smaller species who lived in fear of their power. Now those species were asked to honor their obligations. Now they were asked to stand beside the Ricari against the human threat. Every single one of them refused. They had all seen the footage from New Eden. They had all watched the Ricari soldiers laugh as they murdered children. None of them wanted to die defending that. None of them wanted to stand between humanity and its vengeance. The Ricari were alone. Admiral Chen continued his campaign with mechanical precision. His officers had studied Ricari military doctrine for decades. They knew exactly where every base was located. They knew the patrol routes and response times and command structures. They exploited every weakness without hesitation. But Chen was careful about one thing. His ships never targeted civilian populations. They destroyed military installations next to cities, but left the cities standing. They eliminated weapons factories, but spared the workers' housing. They were ruthless in their destruction of military capability, but surgical in their avoidance of innocence. Some of his officers questioned this restraint. They pointed out that the Ricari had shown no such mercy at New Eden. They argued that the enemy deserved the same treatment they had given. Chen listened to their arguments. Then he explained why they were wrong. He told them that humanity was not at war with the Ricari people. Humanity was at war with the Ricari military and the priests who commanded them. The civilians had not chosen to attack New Eden. Many of them probably did not even know what had really happened there. The priests controlled all information. The priests told the people only what they wanted them to believe. Killing civilians would not bring justice, Chen said. It would only create more enemies. It would prove the priests right about humanity being a savage species. It would turn this war from a righteous response into simple genocide. The officers accepted his reasoning. Most of them were relieved. Meanwhile, the Ricari high priest grew desperate. His military was being destroyed faster than he could rebuild it. His allies had abandoned him. His own people were beginning to ask questions about why the humans were so angry, about what had really happened at the colony called New Eden. He tried to suppress the footage. He declared it false. He said the humans had fabricated the whole thing to justify their aggression. Some of his people believed him. Many did not. Cracks appeared in the Dominion's unity. Regional governors began quietly seeking ways to contact the human fleet. Military commanders surrendered their ships rather than fight. The empire that had stood for 2,000 years began to rot from within. 6 weeks after the campaign began, the human fleet reached the Ricari homeworld. They did not approach in secret. They arrived in full view of every sensor and satellite in the system. 400 warships arranged in perfect formation, blocking out the stars. The largest military force anyone had ever seen, positioned directly above the capital city of a civilization that had believed itself invincible. Admiral Chen broadcast his message. He spoke in the Ricari language, his words translated by computers, but his meaning unmistakable. He told them what had happened at New Eden. He showed them the footage. He made them watch their soldiers murder children while laughing. Then he told them what would happen next. The Ricari military was gone. Every ship had been destroyed or captured. Every base had been reduced to rubble. There was nothing left to protect their world. The humans could begin orbital bombardment within minutes. They could reduce every city to ash before nightfall. They could end the Ricari species in a single day. He paused and let them contemplate that reality. Then he told them what humanity actually wanted. They wanted the war criminals brought to justice. They wanted the priests who ordered the massacre to stand trial. They wanted the soldiers who carried out the murders to face punishment. They wanted reparations for the families of the dead. They wanted a permanent end to Ricari military capability. They did not want genocide. They did not want slavery. They did not want conquest. They wanted justice. Nothing more. Nothing less. The high priest broadcast his response within the hour. He stood before his people in his golden robes and called upon them to resist. He said that humanity was bluffing. He said that the chosen people would never surrender to a lesser species. He said that death was preferable to dishonor. His followers cheered. The faithful remained faithful, but not everyone was faithful anymore. The footage that Chen had broadcast reached billions of Rakari citizens who had never seen it before. The priest had controlled information for centuries, but they could not control a transmission from 400 warships in orbit. People saw what their military had done. They saw the laughter. They saw the bodies of children. Protests began within hours. Citizens gathered in public squares and demanded answers. They demanded to know why their soldiers had murdered innocents. They demanded to know why their priests had lied about what happened. They demanded to know why their empire was burning because of decisions they had never made. The high priest ordered his remaining security forces to suppress the protests. They tried. They failed. In the capital city, a crowd of hundreds of thousands marched on the great temple. They pushed past guards and broke down doors. They found the high priest in his private chambers, preparing his final prayers. They dragged him out into the street. Admiral Chen watched from orbit as the Vakari people did what he had given them the space to do. He had destroyed their military. He had removed the power that protected their corrupt leadership. Now the people themselves were taking the final step. The high priest was not killed. The crowd was angry but not murderous. They wanted him to face trial. They wanted him to answer for what he had done. They wanted justice, just like the humans did. A new government formed within days. It was fragile and uncertain, made up of regional governors and moderate leaders who had quietly opposed the priests for years. They contacted the human fleet and asked for terms. Admiral Chen gave them terms. They were harsh but fair. The Rakari would disarm permanently. They would pay reparations to the families of New Eden's dead. They would prosecute their own war criminals under human observation. They would never again maintain an offensive military capability. In exchange, they would be allowed to exist. Their civilians would not be harmed. Their culture would not be destroyed. They would have the chance to become something better than what they had been. The new government accepted. Sarah Okonkwo watched from the medical ship as the treaty was signed. She still felt hollow. She still felt the weight of everything she had lost. But she also felt something she had not expected. She felt the beginning of hope. The war was over, but the work had just begun. Admiral Chen remained in orbit above the Rakari homeworld for 3 months after the surrender. His fleet stood watch as the new government struggled to establish itself. His observers attended the trials of war criminals. His medical ships provided aid to civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. Not everyone understood why he was doing this. Back on Earth, there were voices calling for harsher measures. Politicians gave speeches demanding that the Vakari suffer as New Eden had suffered. Grieving families asked why the people who had killed their children were being allowed to rebuild. Citizens who had watched the footage asked why mercy was being shown to monsters. Admiral Chen received thousands of messages. Some thanked him for his restraint. Many cursed him for his weakness. A few threatened his life for betraying the dead. He read them all. He answered none of them. Sarah Okonkwo came to his quarters on the 47th day of the occupation. She had been living on the medical ship, helping care for wounded refugees from the conflict. She had not spoken to Chen since they had arrived in the system. Now she stood at his door and asked if they could talk. He let her in. His quarters were simple: a bed, a desk, a chair. No decorations except for a single photograph of a woman and 2 children. His family, she assumed. She did not ask about them. She sat down across from him and told him what she was feeling. She told him about the hollow place inside her that would not fill no matter how many Rakari ships she watched burn. She told him about lying awake at night, hearing the laughter of the soldiers in her dreams. She told him about watching the trials and waiting to feel something like closure. It never came, she said. No matter how many war criminals were convicted, she still felt empty. Chen listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he told her about his grandfather. His grandfather had been a soldier in the last great war on Earth, before humanity reached the stars. He had seen terrible things. He had done terrible things. He had come home with wounds that did not show on his body, but never healed. For years after the war, his grandfather had been angry. He drank too much. He fought too often. He pushed away everyone who loved him. He wanted the world to hurt as much as he did. Then one day he stopped. He sobered up. He apologized to his family. He started working with other veterans, helping them find their way back from the darkness he had known. Chen asked his grandfather what had changed. The old man thought about it for a while. Then he said that he realized revenge was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. The people who had hurt him were already dead or in prison. His anger was not punishing them, it was only punishing himself. Sarah listened to the story. She did not feel better. She was not sure she ever would. But she understood what Chen was trying to say. She asked him why he had shown restraint, why he had not simply burned the Reikari worlds and left them as ashes, why he had stopped when he had the power to keep going. Chen looked at the photograph on his desk. Then he looked back at her. He told her that before he left for this campaign, his daughter had asked him a question. She was 12 years old enough to understand what was happening. She had seen the footage from New Eden like everyone else. She knew that her father was going to war. She asked him if he was going to kill all the Reikari. She asked him if he was going to make their children burn like the children of New Eden had burned. He told her no. She asked him why not. They deserved it, she said. They killed innocent people. They laughed while they did it. Why should their children live when our children died? Chen had not known how to answer at first. The question was too big, too important to get wrong. He thought about it for a long time while his daughter waited. Finally, he told her that there were two kinds of strength in the universe. There was the strength to destroy, and there was the strength to stop. Anyone with enough weapons could burn a world. Only someone truly strong could choose not to. He told her that the dead of New Eden could not be honored by creating more dead children. They could only be honored by building a future where such things never happened again. A future where humanity was strong enough to protect innocents everywhere, including the innocent children of their enemies. His daughter had not fully understood. She was 12, but she had accepted his answer. Sarah sat with this for a while. She thought about the children she had hidden with in the shelter back on New Eden. She thought about what would have happened to them if the Reikari had shown the same restraint that Chen was showing now. They would have lived, she said finally. Yes, Chen replied. They would have lived. The trials continued for months. The soldiers who had carried out the massacre were identified through careful investigation. The footage that Sarah had recorded became the primary evidence. Every laugh, every execution, every act of cruelty was documented and presented to the tribunal. The convicted were executed by their own people. The new Reikari government insisted on this. They wanted to prove that they rejected what had been done in their name. They wanted to show that they could deliver justice without human hands. The high-ranking priests who had ordered the attack faced a different punishment. They were sentenced to life imprisonment in facilities where they would be forced to watch the footage of New Eden every day for the rest of their lives. They would see what they had done. They would never be allowed to forget. Some humans thought this was too lenient. Some Reikari thought it was too harsh. Most people on both sides simply wanted it to be over. Sarah attended every day of the trials. She watched the soldiers who had killed her neighbors try to defend themselves. She watched them claim they were just following orders. She watched them insist that they had not known the colonists were truly innocent. One soldier recognized her. He had been in the group that searched the shelter. He had walked past her hiding place without seeing her. Now he looked at her across the courtroom, and something passed between them. He did not ask for forgiveness. She would not have given it. But when his sentence was read and he was led away to face execution, he looked at her one more time. There was something in his eyes that might have been regret. Or it might have been nothing at all. She chose to believe it was regret. The reparations took longer to arrange. The Reikari economy had been damaged by the war. They did not have the resources to pay what they owed. But they tried. They gave what they could. They promised to give more as they recovered. The families of New Eden's dead received payments that could never replace what they had lost. No amount of money could bring back a parent or child or spouse. But the payments were symbols. They were acknowledgments that something terrible had happened and that someone was taking responsibility. Admiral Chen finally left the Reikari system after 6 months. His fleet departed in formation, leaving behind only a small observation force. The war that had never been officially named was officially over. On his last day in orbit, Chen received a communication from the new Reikari leader. She was a former regional governor who had opposed the priest quietly for decades. She thanked him for his restraint. She promised that her people would never forget what humanity had done, both the destruction and the mercy. Chen replied simply. He told her that humanity would be watching. He told her that they wanted peace. He told her that if the Vakari ever threatened innocence again, there would be no second chance. Then he ordered his fleet to jump, and they were gone. Sarah stayed behind. She had decided that she could not go home yet. There was nothing waiting for her there but memories. Instead, she transferred to the diplomatic corps. She had seen enough death. She wanted to spend the rest of her life preventing more. She requested assignment to the Rakari sector. Some people thought she was crazy. Others thought she was brave. She thought she was simply doing what needed to be done. The dead of New Eden could not speak for themselves anymore. Someone had to speak for them. Someone had to make sure their deaths meant something more than revenge. Sarah intended to be that someone. 10 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted. The war between humanity and the Rakari had lasted only weeks, but its effects rippled outward for decades. Every species that had watched those events unfold learned something new about the humans, who smiled too much and talked too much and always seemed so eager to make friends. They learned that the smiles were real, but they covered something deeper. Something ancient and patient and terribly dangerous when provoked. Military theorists across 100 worlds studied what they called the Terra Doctrine. They noted that humanity had not sought to conquer the Vakari. They had not claimed territory or demanded tribute. They had simply destroyed the military capability that threatened them and then offered peace. It was not victory in the traditional sense. It was something more unsettling. It was judgment. The message was clear to anyone paying attention. Humanity wanted peace. Humanity preferred trade and diplomacy and friendship. But if you attacked their civilians, if you murdered their innocent, if you laughed while you did it, then there would be consequences beyond imagination. And when those consequences were delivered, humanity would not become the monster they had defeated. They would offer the chance to rebuild. They would show mercy that their enemies had not shown them. It was a doctrine that combined absolute ruthlessness with absolute restraint. It terrified everyone who understood it. Admiral Chen retired from military service shortly after returning from the Rakari campaign. He had seen enough war to last several lifetimes. He moved to a quiet town on Earth and took a teaching position at a university. His students were eager to learn about tactics and strategy and the great battles he had won. He did not teach them about those things. Instead, he taught them about history, about how civilizations rose and fell, about how power corrupted and absolute power corrupted absolutely, about how the hardest decision a leader ever faced was not whether to destroy an enemy, but whether to stop destroying when they had the chance to keep going. When students asked him about the Vakari campaign, he told them the truth. He told them that destroying the Vakari military had been easy. His forces were overwhelming, his intelligence was perfect, and his enemy had underestimated humanity completely. The hard part, he said, was stopping. Every day of that campaign, he had received reports of new atrocities discovered. Mass graves found, evidence of other massacres covered up. Each report made him angrier. Each report made it easier to justify one more strike, one more battle, one more destroyed city. He could have kept going. He could have turned the Rakari homeworld into glass. He could have ended their species as completely as they had tried to end the people of New Eden. He chose not to. That choice, he told his students, was the only thing that mattered. Sarah Okonkwo spent the decade building bridges. She worked in the diplomatic corps, serving as a liaison between human and Rakari officials. It was difficult work. Many humans did not understand why she would help the people who had killed her family. Many Rakari did not understand why she did not hate them all. She explained it the same way every time. The soldiers who killed her family were dead or imprisoned. The priests who ordered the massacre were rotting in cells, watching footage of their crimes every day. Justice had been delivered. What remained now was the future, and the future had to be built by the living, not sacrificed to the dead. The Vakari people were not her enemies. Most of them had not known what was happening at New Eden. Many of them had been horrified when they learned the truth. They were not responsible for the crimes of their military and religious leaders. Sarah refused to hate children for the sins of their parents. She had seen where that kind of hatred led. She had watched it burn her home to ashes. On the 10th anniversary of the New Eden massacre, a memorial ceremony was held on Elysium 4. Dignitaries came from across human space. The Vakari sent representatives as well, the first time their people had been officially invited to human territory since the war. The memorial was a wall of white stone, built on the spot where the colony's central square had stood. 12,000 names were carved into it. Each name represented a life cut short. Each name represented a story that would never be finished. Sarah stood before the crowd and gave a speech. She did not talk about vengeance or victory. She talked about the people she had known. She talked about Mr. Chen, her neighbor, who had saved her life and died cursing the soldiers in 3 languages. She talked about her mother, who had gone to work that morning and never come home. She talked about her father, who had died in the first bombing without ever knowing what was happening. She talked about who they were, not how they died. When she finished, she invited a Vakari woman to the podium. Her name was Kira, and she was part of the official delegation. She was also the daughter of one of the soldiers who had participated in the massacre. Her father had been executed for his crimes 10 years earlier. Kira stood before the crowd of humans and spoke in halting but clear English. She apologized. She apologized for what her father had done. She apologized for what her people had done. She did not ask for forgiveness because she knew she had no right to ask. She simply wanted them to know that she was sorry and that she had dedicated her life to making sure nothing like this ever happened again. The crowd was silent when she finished. Some people were crying. Some were angry. Most were simply overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Then an old man walked forward from the crowd. He was in his 80s, white-haired and bent with age. He had lost his grandchildren at New Eden. He had lost his daughter and son-in-law. He had lost almost everything that mattered to him. He walked up to Kira and took her hands in his. He looked into her eyes for a long moment. Then he spoke in a voice that cracked with emotion. He told her that he did not forgive her father. He could not. The wound was too deep and too personal. But he told her that he did not blame her for what her father had done. She was not her father. She was a new generation, a chance for something better. He told her that the dead would have wanted their deaths to mean something. They would have wanted their sacrifice to build a future where human children and Vakari children could grow up in peace. A future where this memorial was a warning, not a prophecy. He gestured at her, at himself, at the crowd watching them. This, he said, this is what it means. 2 people from species that had been at war, standing together at a memorial, choosing to build instead of destroy. Kira was crying. The old man was crying. Most of the crowd was crying. Sarah watched from the podium and felt something shift inside her. The hollow place that had lived in her chest for 10 years began to fill. Not with happiness, not with peace, but with something more complicated, something that felt like purpose. The memorial ceremony ended as the sun set over Elysium. The sky turned gold and pink and purple, painting the white stone wall with colors that seemed almost alive. The names of the dead glowed in the fading light. Children played in the fields nearby. The same fields that had burned 10 years ago were now green with new crops. Families had returned to New Eden. Not many, not yet, but enough. Life was returning to the place where death had ruled. Sarah stayed at the memorial long after the crowds departed. She stood before her parents' names and talked to them quietly. She told them about her work. She told them about the bridges she was building. She told them about the young Vakari woman who had apologized for crimes she did not commit. She told them that she was going to be okay. She did not know if they could hear her. She did not know if there was anything after death. But she liked to think that somewhere, somehow, they knew that their daughter had survived, that she had not let hatred destroy her, that she was building the future they would have wanted. The stars came out one by one. Sarah looked up at them and thought about all the worlds out there, all the species watching humanity, all the civilizations trying to understand what had happened here. She thought about the lesson that New Eden had taught the galaxy. It was not a lesson about human strength, though that strength had been demonstrated beyond all doubt. It was not a lesson about human vengeance, though that vengeance had been terrible and swift. It was a lesson about human choice. Humanity had chosen to protect the innocent. They had chosen to punish the guilty. They had chosen to show mercy when they had every right to show none. They had chosen to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of wound, to hope instead of hate. Those choices made them what they were. Not their weapons, not their armies, not their capacity for destruction, their choices. Sarah made her own choice that night. She decided to keep building bridges until her hands gave out. She decided to keep speaking for the dead until her voice failed. She decided to keep hoping for a future where no one had to lose what she had lost. It was the only way she knew to honor them. The memorial stood watch in the darkness, 12,000 names carved in stone, 12,000 stories that would never be forgotten. And above it, the stars burned with the light of a million worlds, a million possibilities, a million chances to choose something better. Humanity had faced the darkness and emerged. Not unchanged, not unscathed, but still human, still capable of love and mercy and hope. That was the real victory. That was what the dead of New Eden had given them. That was what Sarah would spend the rest of her life protecting.